like to talk today a little bit about this topic, which is the value of observation. I feel like observation is a big key to um, environmental interpretation. It's a skill that I think is often lacking, and so I want to talk about it a little bit for this activity lesson. Is observation valuable? I think it is, obviously, or we wouldn't be talking about it. I think there's a great quote from Maria Montessori, which says, "We cannot create observers by saying observe. You can't just tell people, but by giving them the power and the means for this observation. And these means are procured through education of the senses." We have to educate the senses of people to be careful observers. And if you're going to enjoy nature, you really need to be a careful observer. And I came upon this as a real need through several experiences that I had with students. One experience was this one here. Taking was I had these students out, and I was doing these are high school students, and I was asking them to look at this prairie plot. You know, not much was growing at the time, but there were a lot of different plants there, and I asked them to note how many different plants they could find. I wasn't asking them to tell me what they were, just saying how many different plants can you find. And I walked from group to group, and a lot of the groups were telling me like three. We found three different kinds of plants. And I knew that there were easily 12 to 15, even maybe 20 different species of plants in those plots. And so my initial thought was these groups are just being lazy, like they're just not looking. And so I was, sort of frustrated. And then I realized it wasn't that they were just being lazy, it's that they really didn't know how to observe. To them, grass was grass. And they didn't know how to look at grass and say, that grass looks different than that grass. They are probably not the same. They're actually probably different species. So um, that was one thing that started me with this. The other thing was that sometimes doing environmental education, we'd ask students to draw things. One example is we had some insect specimens, and we'd say, draw an insect, so like the one here on the left. And they would draw something like the insect on the right, which actually doesn't look anything like the insect on the left. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad drawing. What I'm saying is when I ask them to draw an insect, they stop looking at the insect and they draw their idea of what an insect is from what they've been, you know, the way they've thought about drawing in the past. So this, another better example might be trees. You say, look at a tree to a child and draw that tree. They will often draw, a big puffy cloud-like thing at the top and two straight things coming down that's supposed to be the trunk. And the tree that you may be looking at looks totally different than that. We may have branches coming out all the way down to the bottom. But they have been taught what a tree, what the image of a tree when you draw it should look like, and that's what they draw. So they're not using observation to draw, they're using sort of memory and this archetypal idea of a tree. So how do we get them to stop doing that and to actually look at what they're seeing? And so those kinds of experiences, doing environmental education, doing environmental interpretation, made me say, we need to cultivate this skill, this learned skill of observation if we want people to really be able to enjoy and learn from nature. So I came up with these 10 principles for observation, guiding principles of observation. So I'm going to go through them, and hopefully you will find some things of value in there. First thing I think is that observing from nature is helpful. You can observe anything carefully. You could give, people, students, I don't know, clarinet to look at and ask them to observe it carefully and draw it. And that's fine. But I think there's real value in actually looking at something from nature. Um, First of all, nature is just so diverse. It's infinitely diverse. So the more carefully you look at it, the more things you're going to learn. If you get out a magnifying glass and look at it, it's going to look different. If you, look at two of the leaves from the same plant, you're going to see little differences and similarities. So there's this infinite level of diversity, which is great for observation skills. Secondly, humans are instinctively fascinated by nature. Look at this child here. Look at the dribble of excitement coming off of his chin when he's holding these salamanders. There's something that is just innately fascinating about nature, and so we should take advantage of that. And then thirdly, in nature, relationships are not arbitrary. Okay, so if you see two leaves that look alike, there's probably an evolutionary reason why they look alike. It's not just like if you could have students sorting um, plastic blocks, and there might be some red blocks and some yellow blocks, and you could have them sort the red versus the yellow, but there's no reason why one's red and one's yellow. Someone chose that, okay? Other than, yeah, so I guess it does reflect somebody's choice somewhere. But if you find things that are similar or different in nature, they're reflective of evolutionary trends. So they're learning things about the whole nature of life on this planet when they're doing categorizations, which we'll talk about in a bit. So the relationships are not arbitrary. So going on, if I can get there, why is nothing coming? Okay. So the second principle is that it is good to observe in context. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you're looking at rocks, go outside and look at the rocks. Now, it's middle of winter, it's a rainy day. Can you bring rocks inside and look at them inside? Sure, but you lose a few things when you do that. And I think whenever you can, to look at them in the context, to look at pine cones standing under a pine tree is helpful. Um, why? Because number one, it helps with memory. Right, the more, without even trying, more senses are being engaged, and the student will remember. Oh, yeah, I remember that feature. I remember studying about pine cones when we were standing outside under the pine tree. Like it gives a context. Um, it adds to subconscious classifications. You may not have to even talk about this pine cone came from this pine tree, but without even thinking about it, students are making that association. They're learning even without knowing that they're learning. And same goes with this. They provide additional information. So I study birds, and I remember the first time when I realized that you could put me in a setting and I could very quickly list for you which birds I would expect to see in that setting because without even knowing it, my brain had started to learn which birds belonged in, which birds lived in which habitats. I didn't try to learn that, but without trying, as I was looking for birds and I would see certain birds in forests and certain birds in other places, my mind got very good at that additional information that I wasn't even trying to learn. So the context adds that. And it encourages a sense of place. Like, this isn't just a rock. This is my rock. This is the rock that I found in the schoolyard right outside my school building. It's part of my place. It's part of this, place that I'm from. And that is a very important concept to environmental interpretation. Okay, so number three, engage all the senses. And I think anybody who's worked in education at all knows that this is an important concept. And nature provides such an opportunity for that. Smell things, touch things, if appropriate, not poisonous, taste things. Why? Because it helps with memory. It helps provide additional information. An American elm leaf and a red elm leaf they look almost identical, but they feel very different. One is very rough and one is very smooth. That's why it's sometimes referred to as slippery elm. So, and actually in guidebooks, they will encourage you to put it between your lips because you can feel the difference in texture so distinctly between your lips. So that additional information that you learn. And again, it encourages a sense of place, right? All of my senses are engaged with this place, this space, these things. This is my place. Okay, number 4, guide students' observation with a step-by-step process. Okay, this is what I learned after doing, after my failed attempt with the students studying the prairie plot. I realized I could do better if I worked with them in a step-by-step process. So I changed that activity, and instead I took them to a forest, and we had a bigger plot that we could all stand around in a larger group. So this helps when you work in groups. And and then I asked them, okay, first person here on my left, point out one plant that you see here. And they'd point out one plant. And then I'd ask the second person, can you find a different plant than that first plant? And they would. And so it sort of became this increasingly, okay, and by person 5 and person 6, can you find a different plant than somebody's pointed out? How do you know it's a different plant? Help them, guide them step by step through the process. But don't tell them what to see. Guide their eyes. So don't say, oh, look for, what want to say? Can't you see this yellow flower here? Um, or let me give you a better example. Go back to the drawing of the insect. Okay, don't say, okay, everybody draw 2 antennae. Say, do you have anything coming out of the front of the insect? What do you see coming out of the front of the insect? How does it look? What is the shape? So guide their eyes, help them see. Don't tell them what to see. Don't say, now draw the legs. Say, what are coming out of the sides? Where are they coming out from the body? Guide their eyes. Okay, number 5, challenge students' categories. So students may start with very simple categories. So they may start with, I've got big things here and little things here. That's how I'm categorizing. Fine, great place to start. Challenge them. Encourage a progression toward a more sophisticated classification. Okay, I see we've got nuts here, and you went with big nuts or seeds. So let's do the seeds. You got big seeds and little seeds. I see these seeds are shaped very differently than these seeds. What if you thought about not only size but shape? Can you do that? How would that change your classification? So you can constantly move toward a more sophisticated classification. But not for the sake of memorizing names, okay? Not just so you can say, I know this species A and this is species B, but really so that you're stirring the desire to look deeper. Stirring the desire like, oh, you know what? Not all trees are the same. Trees are different. There's all these trees out here, and you can actually get to know them. You can actually know one tree from another. And a lot of people don't know that. And just helping them see that as something that makes them different than other people can also be encouraging in their learning. Okay, number 6, encourage articulation of observations. Okay, this, I'm sure, again, with education, educators are very aware of this, but this can be very helpful to say. So, for example, one activity I like to do with students is where everyone picks up something, like, say, a leaf. Everyone find a leaf. We stand in a circle, and I say, look at your leaf really carefully. Take your finger and rub it around the edge of your leaf and feel the edges. Look for anything that stands out, like different colors or spots. Okay, everyone look at it. Now we're going to go around and everyone tell me about your leaf. So ask them to articulate what they're seeing. This helps with memory because they have to say, oh, this leaf had really pointed edges and this one had smooth edges. It promotes clarification, so they start to really understand the difference between the two kinds of leaves. It encourages them to learn from each other. Peer learning is very important. And it also encourages, increases their vocabulary. A lot of times, students have a hard time thinking of the descriptive words to use. So the more you do this, the more students become familiar with creative descriptive words to describe things and when they're observing things. Okay, principle number 7, use drawing as an observation tool. This is really important. Drawing can be such an important tool. Not if it's used, like I said earlier, where I just ask them to basically draw from some idea of a tree. But if they look carefully and draw what they see, that's important. Now, it's important that the drawing itself is not the goal. Some people might be better skilled at drawing than others. That's not the point. The point is how much it helps you to learn when you draw. It engages more of your senses, and it also helps you look more carefully. Again, I would encourage a step-by-step process here. So everyone has they're looking at an insect that they're going to be drawing and say, okay, let's start with the shape. What is the overall shape that you are seeing? And have everyone draw that. What do you notice about where the body divides? Are there places where the body divides? Can you see a head that's separate from another part, that's separate from another part? Okay, put that in your drawing. What do you see sticking out from the top of your insect? Okay, let's look at that and draw. And so take that step-by-step process. And then relate those features to functions. Okay, maybe everyone's standing around an aquarium and you're drawing the fish that's there. Okay, let's draw what we see on the back end of the fish. Does anyone know what that might be called? Does anyone know what that's for? So thinking about what these things are for. Again, in nature, these features are not random. They have purposes. So helping students think about those purposes is helpful. Number 8, encourage exploration, right? Encourage them to find new things. So start broad. Like an activity I might start with is go out and find as many different leaves as you can. You've got 2 minutes, find as many different leaves as you can and bring them back. Then start looking for patterns. Okay, we got these leaves, look for patterns. Okay, let's put these here, these leaves. So what are you seeing? What are we seeing? What patterns are we seeing? Then I'd say take a moment and make it even more of a challenge. Okay, do you think there are any kind of leaves that we missed? Do you think you can find any other kinds of leaves? I don't know. We found an awful lot. So make it a challenge. Encourage that sense of challenge to go along with the sense of observation. All right, number 9, look for those large-scale patterns. Okay, use details to find the larger patterns. So looking at the small things and then saying, that leaf looks a lot like this leaf. Do you think they're the same, from the same tree, or do you think they're from a different tree? Why or why not? And start to find those larger patterns, because again, these patterns reflect evolutionary trends. They reflect the reality of the natural world. What do these things have in common, and what are the larger themes that you can find? So taking the observation to then draw themes. And then number 10 is model this curiosity. I cannot stress this one enough. Model natural curiosity. You be a keen observer so that students see how you are observing. So what does this mean? Be careful and excited. So you see something that's new, or say a student brings you a maple leaf and you've seen 10,000 maple leaves. You still have to model that excitement. You're like, wow, that is such an amazing color. Isn't that an amazing color? And I love the way that this leaf is shaped. Look at how it's different than this other leaf that we found. It's such a different shape. So model those. Get your face close to things. Help them see that you're looking carefully. And model the articulation of your observations. Say, wow, look at how smooth this is. Look at how rough this is. I love the way that this bark is so rough or so firm when I press on it. Just use whatever descriptive words that you can think of to help model trying to come up with good words to describe what you're thinking about. And then avoid passing on your squeamishness. Okay, this is one I did a lot of work with finding, insects and those sorts of things. And when I first started doing it, I was a little squeamish myself. But you got to kind of push that down. If you don't want to touch things, fine. But, point at things. Don't let them see your squeamishness. It's incredibly contagious when adults are squeamish about things. Um, so model good curiosity. Don't model squeamishness. And those are my thoughts on observation. And I do think it's a really important skill that's often overlooked when it comes to nature interpretation and nature education.